Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and dear friends. This is your one-stop shopping for inside information, the inside baseball of comics, where you get to ask your geekiest, nerdiest, most granular question about what it is I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books and answer questions about my own career. I'm getting close to 40 years in the business as a professional comic book writer, and a little bit of comic book history. And then a lot of you simply want my general opinion on pop culture items, which I'm perfectly willing to share if you're curious. And let's get to the first of your curiosities. Glenn Davis, your talk about European Western comics was very interesting. It got me to wondering if you were a fan of the so-called Piccadilly Westerns, paperbacks written in England such as Edge, Steel, Crow, etc. Currently, reprints of Benedict and Brazos seem pretty popular. Have you read them? Well, for those of you who don't know, Piccadilly Press was and is a publishing house for Westerns. Westerns continue to be popular in Europe. There's a very popular weekly, I think it's a weekly or bi-weekly Western magazine, which, basically it's like an old pulp style deal, still published in Germany. It's published for decades. Anyway, Piccadilly Press, presents these paperback originals written by guys who've never been west of the Cotswolds. But they know their way around a cowboy story. And I recently read some of this series, Gringos. I didn't know about it. It's kind of a Wild Bunch, very much a Wild Bunch knockoff, but kind of fun. And I'm a sucker for this period, the Mexican Revolution, Texas border stories. I love this kind of stuff. And, I haven't followed a lot of these series. Every once in a while, I'll pick one up or get it on Kindle and take a peek. But these guys have been producing for an awfully long time and apparently popular. For a long time in the 70s, they were published here in the United States by Pinnacle Press. And, of course, their crowning achievement, the one most famous here in America, is the Edge series. And I did read a bunch of these back in the day when they were first released in the 70s. My dad and I were avid Western paperback readers, and there was always stacks of them in his workshop. He was always picking up new ones, and I would pick up a new one and say, hey, you might want to check this out. We read through, all the big writers at the time. And we gave this series a whirl, and it's funny because my dad and I both gave up on the series about the same time. It's like the fifth or sixth book, Edge invents the bazooka. These books were heavy on carnage, and Edge in particular was heavy on like torture and sadistic cruelty and sort of, predatory sexual scenes. My dad and I were both turned off for the same reasons. But, if you're into this stuff, if you like a really, really mean Western, Edge is the way to go. And generally, that's the way the Piccadilly Westerns are. They're certainly written for adults. I don't know if they are so much now. The era of the adult Western kind of faded away. And more of the current contemporary Western paperbacks I've read just are, they could have been written in the 50s or 60s. So I imagine Piccadilly has cleaned up its act because that seemed to be the way the market was going. I don't know if the adult Western readership aged out or whatever, but it kind of ended overnight from what I've read by accounts written by paperback writers. That one day the adult Western was king, and the next you couldn't give one away. Okay, B-Rick 690. I have been reading through an excellent manga called Bakuman. In the story, one of the characters, Takagi, who handles the story portion of the in-story manga, often travels to different places when he is experiencing writer's block looking for ideas. my question for you is, have you ever traveled for inspiration for anything you've written? Well, comics don't really pay enough to travel. I mean, I love reading about these writers who, they're going to write a novel and they got a big advance. So, they go to Paris or Tombstone or, Ho Chi Minh City and, and live there for a while to soak up the local color. I don't have that luxury. Like Edgar Rice Burroughs, who never visited Africa. I've never visited almost any of the places that I've written about. The only traveling I'll do, I don't suffer writer's block because you can talk yourself into writer's block. But if I'm in like the middle passage of a novel, I'm feeling a little bit lost, not real sure of how to proceed, which you might think is writer's block, but it's not. Writer's block is, from what I'm told, is like almost like a chronic depression, where you're stuck and you can't get your brain to work properly. More often than not, I'm struck by a option paralysis. Like there's several ways I could go forward with the story, but which one is the best? Which will provide me with the best scenes? And sometimes I'll just hop in the car and drive. I live near a really, really nice highway here in Florida that if you drive north, for the most part, there's no traffic. So you're on this straight as a string highway, and I just, put on some music and drive. And generally, by the time I've gotten to the fourth or fifth exit, I've got what I need. And for those of you horrified that I'm burning up my carbon footprint, driving around in a pickup truck, thinking of ideas, well, hey, it's my environment too. Now, the only time I've ever, I guess this is traveling or did outside research, I wanted to write a story about, well, actually, I didn't want to write it. It was proposed to me, and I wanted to write it. My good buddy Todd Fox proposed to me this idea for a Punisher story. Actually, originally it was an Airboy story he proposed, where Airboy is thrown from an airplane or is left in an airplane while everybody dives out with parachutes, and poor Airboy is left behind with no parachute and basically left to die by the bad guys. I never used this as an Airboy story, but I asked Todd his permission, could I use this as a Punisher story? Which I did. And the bulk of the issue is Punisher in free fall. He dives out of the plane after the guys who have dived out before him. And of course, his objective is to kill one of them and steal his parachute. Now, I knew nothing about skydiving. And, you can only read so much. And because the bulk of the issue was this action scene, and it was going to be narrated by Punisher, who we can assume was conversant with skydiving, parachuting from his days in the military, in the Marines, I needed verbiage. I needed Frank to sound like he knew what he was talking about. And no amount of reading about skydiving is going to give me what I needed. And so I called a local parachute. I was living in Lancaster, Pennsylvania at the time, and I called a local skydiving school. And I said, look, I'm doing some writing, and I had some questions. Is it okay if I come out there and ask one of your people questions about skydiving? Like a quick lesson. Won't take more than 20 minutes for me to ask these questions. I just need to talk to an expert. And they said, fine, come on out. And we made the appointment, and I went out to this airfield, this big hangar, and I met this guy. And he said, well, is this for a magazine or a newspaper? I said, no, actually, it's for a comic book. I said, I write a character called the Punisher. And now this guy was like, what? Why? What? I instantly felt like I was wasting this guy's time. He didn't want to talk to a comic book writer. He thought he was going to get some publicity for his school in like a magazine article. And he said, well, what comic book? And I said, he's called The Punisher. And he says, what is that, like a sadomasochistic character? And I said, no. He's an ex-Marine whose family is killed, and he goes on on the warpath to fight crime. And this guy said, I was a Marine. Now he's suddenly interested. And he couldn't do enough for me. He answered a lot of questions so that I could have Frank sound like an expert as he was plummeting to his death. And he gave me all the stuff like, given, the different heights and the time period. The coolest thing was that the story had to take place in 180 seconds with Punisher diving from the height that he was diving from. And the guy really made the story work. Really, it made it allowed me to write with an authority that I did not exactly possess, a borrowed authority, I suppose. So, I haven't done a whole lot of, I haven't done any traveling for writing. Now, traveling I've done in the past, I've drawn on, places I've been, things I've seen. I've drawn on when necessary, but never any purposeful traveling just to write something. Must be nice. Michael Hutchison. Hey, Hutch. As a subtle characterization of Bane in Dark Knight Rises, Tom Hardy had him carrying knitting needles and knit in his downtime. What do you think of this little detail? I think it would have been interesting if every now and then one of his henchmen had a knitted scarf. This is one of those things that writers throw in. They'll throw in quirks. And quirks are usually in place of characterization. I don't know if this was meant to be funny. I barely remember it in the story. I don't know if it was meant to be funny or what. Or maybe Tom Hardy actually was knitting between takes, and they just decided to incorporate it into the movie. It makes little sense to me, given the fact that I don't remember him killing anybody with a knitting needle. So, which if it was a Bond movie, you would have to have had that happen. You can't introduce something like a knitting needle and not have someone get killed with it. I don't really remember a whole lot about Nitty Bane, but it's like I said, it's just something thrown in lieu of actual characterization, to have the character have a quirk. If you remember the movie Scrooged, where Robert Mitchum has this priceless conversation with Bill Murray about how demographics have shown that more and more pets are watching television, and Mitchum wants to know if they can have a detective character who dangles string. Not all the time, but that's what you do in place of characterization. John Dorsey, I was a huge CrossGen fan back in the day, and I wanted to ask you a question about Ruse. I know you didn't work on this comic, but I was wondering if you knew the backstory behind the character of Emma. What was the deal with her powers in which she was able to freeze time? This was never explained. I was hoping you might know the answer. Thanks for your time. Ruse was an epic story set in the world of Arcadia. It was very much like Victorian London. Unfortunately, it wasn't Victorian London because that was the thing at CrossGen, where we explored different genres, but they could never take place on Earth. They had to take place on some parallel Earth equivalent, which never made any sense to me, because this is obviously Victorian London or Edwardian London. So why not let it be that? I just never understood why this had to be. It just removed the reader, distanced the reader from the material, and certainly tried to distance the creators as well. This is a creation of Mark Waid, very much working with Butch Guice. You cannot you can't underestimate the amount of input Butch had into these stories. But Butch, when invited, becomes very, very involved in the collaborative process of writing. And he's a great story guy, and obviously a great image guy, because he knows what's going to look good on the page, things like that. So Wade came up with the basic premise, but Butch and Mike Perkins as well. Mike was the regular inker on the title, and I know because I was there that Mark and Butch and Mike would have a lot of different meetings with Mark Waid. And then later when Mark left and Scott Beatty took over the title, I was actually in on a few of those meetings. I got invited to a few dinners to talk ruse. I didn't really contribute anything because, these guys really didn't need my help. I think they were just being polite. And maybe they wanted a cross-gen staff writer in attendance. I don't know. Maybe they wanted me to pay for the meal. That might have been more what was going on because I had a charge account. All the writers, for some reason, at CrossGen had company cards. So there you go. Now the other thing about Ruse that's really cool is that Butch was experimenting with this 2-page spread storytelling style, which was different. This book looked different even than all the other cross-gen titles, and Butch was doing a lot of experimentation here. Now, as far as the characters, the character of Emma in each one of the cross-gen titles, and if you read only Ruse, you wouldn't know this. Each one of the cross-gen titles had a sigil bearer or a magic character, who was connected to the sigil verse. I can't remember a lot of this stuff. I'm not sure I ever understood a lot of this stuff, but apparently all of the heroes in the cross-gen universe had this sidekick, usually an attractive woman, who was the sigil bearer or sigil thing or MacGuffin, connecting to a larger reality. And these characters always had mystical, magical powers of some kind. And they were there as a guide and sidekick for the hero. This is part of the downfall of cross-gen, was this connection to this Uber story, that you couldn't read these titles independently and fully understand what was going on because they were all connected to this larger overarching saga. And huge mistake. And you add that to the fact that none of these genre stories were based on Earth. They were based in like these parallel worlds with made up place names and things like that. It's sort of, it chased away a lot of readers. It discouraged a lot of readers. It's like, where do I jump in here? And it confused readers who tried to just pick up an issue and follow it. I tried to write against that. I tried to make my stuff engaging on its own, separated as much as possible from the sigil verse. One example of this is when I began writing Way of the Rat, I made the sigil bearer or the mystical character a macaque monkey named Popo who could talk. Not only was he was a martial arts master, but he could talk. And mostly only Boone, he only talked when Boone was around. Boone was the hero of the story. And I also made Boone sort of very much a Jackie Chan character. He was, not always the brightest bulb on the tree. He makes a lot of mistakes. He's morally compromised because he's a thief, which made him unlike any of the other cross-gen characters. And I got a lot of grief from Mark Alessi, the owner of CrossGen, for making the mystical character a monkey. He said, well, I want it to be an attractive woman. And I said, yeah, you want the sigil person to be an attractive woman in every one of these stories. It's getting a little tired. It's getting very, very tired. I said, I want the monkey. And he fought with me, but I dug my heels in, and finally I think I won him over by talking about, the monkey god and Chinese mythology and the Monkey King and how important that was. And I just BS'd him. I just wanted a monkey. I didn't care about the mythical or, mythical antecedents about putting a monkey into a Asian martial arts story. I just wanted a monkey, and a monkey who drinks a lot and who's snide and snarky. And he really didn't see my way on this. And then I angered him further by our usual thing was they had a house person who would write the letters columns. And I thought it would be fun if our letters column in Way of the Rat was answered by Popo. It was answered by the monkey in his voice and his character. And so we just went ahead and did it. We didn't ask permission. And we just went ahead and did the letters page with Popo answering the letters. And again, Mark exploded because this was breaking the formula. This was breaking the way we did things. And I said, well, it's, our letters pages aren't good. The person writing the answers to the letters doesn't seem to understand that the letters page isn't just about the reader's opinions. It's also a way to promote our work. So you don't reprint highly critical letters in your letters page and then agree with them, which is sometimes the person doing the letters column would agree with readers who didn't like certain aspects of the books because they were the same aspects she didn't like, which is why she picked the letter in the first place. So I said, no, you only pick complimentary letters. To which he said, well, what if you don't get a lot of complimentary letters? And I said, here's a dirty little secret, Mark. If you don't get enough complimentary letters, you write your own. I said, that's how it's done in the bigs. That's how it's done at DC and Marvel. If you wanted to make a point about something to the reader, you made up a phony fan letter to address the issue. Not unheard of. He was stunned, he was shocked, he was appalled, and just very, very angry at what we did. And then the letters started pouring in from people who loved Popo. They loved the letters column. We got a bigger reaction from this talking monkey from letter writers than about any other thing CrossGen had ever done. And the kicker is that Mark's daughter, Ashley, thought that Popo was hysterical. And she thought the letters column was hysterical. And she was reading it out loud to her father over breakfast one morning. And suddenly Mark loved Popo. He came in and said, we need more of that. And we started pushing it. Popo became almost the unofficial CrossGen mascot at one point. So give credit to the man. At least he turned around on it when it was obvious that this is what the public wanted. The people had spoken. But, those were some of the difficulties and challenges of working at CrossGen. Still a wonderful experience. And as I've said before, I'd go back and do it again in a heartbeat. Dan Battles, could you talk about some of your worst experiences with an editor? Not necessarily asking for names. Oh, yeah, you want names. You want names, people. But did you get any bad feedback or dumb requests for edits to your scripts? Look, I've had some amazing editors. And I like working with editors. You'll hear these ideas that, writers are like fighting with their editors all the time. And, that's just not the case. You have writers that complain about editors, but, well, hey, then stop working for them. But for the most part, 90% of the time, I've had terrific editors who were a lot of fun to work with. And basically we were partners in creating quality material. And that to me is the measure of an editor. Are they interested in the end product, or are they just interested in imposing their own ego? Now, I've had some bad editors. I think the worst was I handed in a script for a character, and the editor said that he had watched an episode of a television show the night before, and he saw these concepts in the show that he thought would be interesting for the book we were working on. I said, yeah, I might be able to work something like that in upcoming issues. And he goes, no, I want you to rewrite this issue. I'd already written and handed in. I want you to rewrite this issue and change it to include these things that were in a TV show I watched last night. And I refused. I said, look, I've already handed it in. You don't pay for rewrites. I said, if you had a legitimate change you wanted to make to the story because you felt that there was some deficiency in the story, I would do it because that's part of the job. I said, but to simply on a whim change the story because of a TV show you watched 2 weeks after I handed the script in, no, I ain't doing that. And of course, it was a pressure play to get me to quit, but I wouldn't. And I guess he didn't. He was just trying to make me miserable enough to quit the book. And I eventually had to say, look, I'm not going to quit this book. You're going to have to fire me. If you don't want me on the book, then man up and say you don't want me on the book. But a lot of comic editors, not the ones I've enjoyed working with, but a lot of comic editors, they're a craven lot. And they don't like confrontation. And they don't actually like firing you. I can't even remember how many times I found out I was fired from a book by reading Diamond previews. Like, hey, my name's not on the next issue. But yeah, you have a lot of editors that, I won't even go into Devil's Due and G.I. Joe. That was that was bad stuff. Working with editors who not only were not interested in the end product, but weren't even conversant with the franchise we were working on. Just knew nothing about any of it. So anyway, enough complaining, enough freelance bitching. Ramu Holanda, do you think it's still safe to be a fan of any fictional character? That's a loaded question. For example, the last thing I heard about the Punisher is that they retconned his past, and now not only he was always a bad husband and a terrible father, but also he could fly. Yes, you read it right. Frank flies now. I've heard this. I don't even want to know about it. To me, Marvel doesn't like the Punisher. And this has been true for a long time. Remember, the Punisher started out as a Batman villain. He's a vigilante, and Spider-Man disapproved of him, and his parent, the Marvel Universe, disapproved of him. And then when he became popular with readers, Marvel wisely decided, well, let's lean into it. Go full bore on him being sort of a Mac Bolan executioner type, paperback vigilante warrior type. And they did some, magazine presentations in their black and whites, which was a much better fit for Punisher than the full color comics anyway. So they did some magazine appearances, and and eventually the miniseries by Stephen Grant and Mike Zeck, and then Punisher ends up with a bunch of monthly titles and all the rest. But he was never a comfortable fit at Marvel. And I guess now we've just coming to the end of the road where they don't like this character, and they're going to, and this isn't the first time they've done this. They're just going to try to, morph and change him and squeeze him into a silly putty mold that they feel more comfortable with. And of course, in every instance, this is going to fail because Punisher fans like the Punisher the way he is. And to try to, it's just vile to take the character and basically try to cancel him. He was a bad dad. He was an abusive husband. It's like, wow, really? So you're going to make the character unrelatable, unlikable, and because you basically don't like the character, and more importantly, at today's woke Marvel, you don't like his fans. You don't like people that like the Punisher, and and the Punisher is a character that it takes someone of a proper mindset to write correctly. You can't have a bleeding heart liberal writing this stuff. And you certainly can't have someone writing a character who doesn't like the character. And it's like, I don't like anything about this character, so if I was given Daredevil, a character I really don't care for, to write, I wouldn't tear Daredevil down. I might show some of his hypocrisies or make life miserable for him. But of course, every writer makes Matt Murdock's life miserable, so that's part of it. But I wouldn't, I would be aware that there are fans of the character that love it and try to find a place within that character where I felt comfortable writing it. but still be true to what the readers expected. But to just take a character like this that millions of readers over the years have loved and just rip it down, defame the character, try to chase away as much of the readership as possible, it doesn't make sense creatively, doesn't make sense from a business aspect. But this is what's happening today, and I really don't know when it's going to end. We see little glimmers of hope that this woke approach to escapist fiction is ending, but it's not. I mean, James Bond cries now, not in a manly way. I can't be the only one. You're sitting, they reboot something you liked, and you're watching it, and you're waiting for the cringe moment, and eventually the cringe moment will arrive. Where they've altered the character beyond all recognition. They have the character doing something so out of character that you can't even bear to watch it anymore. That they've just morphed and changed it and remolded it, quote unquote, for modern audiences. Who's this modern audience? I don't see it, because whenever they rebrand something for modern audiences, all I see is sales go down. So what's wrong with the old audience? John Bua, I heard you say you're not a fan of the concept, the hero's journey. As a guy trying his hand at writing a comic, would you advise me to avoid that concept? Why are you not a fan of it? Well, years ago, Joseph Campbell wrote a series of books basically articulating why mythology and classic storytelling was appealing. And him and Bill Moyers in a series of tedious PBS specials discussed this at length, burning up your taxpayer dollars on nonsense. And Bill Moyers, puts forth that there's only so many stories to tell, and the human brain is hardwired to like certain kinds of stories. Like it's, like stories are comfort food. And so that even modern storytellers have to stay within these guidelines and tell these stories in, maybe recast them, but they're basically the same stories as were told in olden days, so that really nothing has changed. And this is a concept that if you want to be a writer, you have to stay as far away from as possible. This stuff has been recommended to me over and over and over again. I remember an editor at Marvel suggested I read the Hero with 1,000 Faces. And I read about 3 chapters. And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's true. They're like, I'm not learning anything here. I was conversant with Greek and Roman mythology. And it's like, I'm not learning anything here. This guy's just repeating these myths and saying that this is all there is. That if you vary from these formulas, you're flying in the face of the way that our brains are wired to accept fictional stories. And that's just such a load of BS. And remember, this is coming from a guy who's an academic who writes about other people's writing, who's never written fiction himself. And my impression was he didn't read a lot of modern fiction. By modern fiction, I mean anything after 1500. So you want to stay away from it because it's discouraging. Also, it tries to encourage you to fit your stories into a mold. Oh, you have to have the Joker character and the princess character and this character and that character. No, you don't. You don't have to have any of that. Just write your own damn story. Because there's a lot of lazy writers out there. And even more so, a lot of lazy movie people. And they read this crap by Campbell and other people, and they think there's like a key, there's an answer, there's a program, there's a way forward, and there's a formula to these stories. And Campbell gives them this language, this shared language to speak in, so they sound like they know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're talking about. They're just repeating stuff they've heard. And I can't tell you how many times you'll have I'll be in a room with writers in it, and there's always that writer who's got to be the smartest guy in the room, or wants to be the smartest guy in the room, and they'll throw out these little aphorisms like, there's only two kinds of stories. There's Cinderella and Red Riding Hood. I forget. I think those are the two. I can't remember. And that's meant to tell us that, all the great stories have already been told. We're just spinning our wheels. We're just crapping stuff out for the cash. I reject that notion entirely. I may never in my whole lifetime come up with an absolutely brand new plot line, but I'll be damned if I'm not going to keep trying. It's been done. I've seen it. I see stuff where it's like, wow, that's completely different than anything else I've ever seen before. If you have to deconstruct plot lines, there's all kinds of ways to write a story, as many as there are people who've written stories. And to go into this sort of lockstep, there's only one way to do it, Joseph Campbell way of looking at things, which is what most people take away from Joseph Campbell. If you buy into that, you've cut yourself off. You've stunted yourself. You've limited your imagination on purpose. And if you're a writer who needs that kind of thing, needs that framework to work within, I suggest you find another profession. What a real writer does is they just think of crazy, crazy stuff, and then they have to work out how to make that work dramatically, how to make that into a cohesive, entertaining story that people would want to read. And that's your task. The Campbell way of thinking would have you literally throw away your best ideas because they didn't fit the mold. And screw that. Screw all of that. Writing fiction comes from an individual point of view. And your story is going to be different. No one's going to write the story that you would write. No one else could write that story. So do it. Sit down and write it, and don't take anybody's advice. Don't read any how-to books. Listen, I'm not telling you how to write. I'm just telling you from my own experience. And I'm basically telling you what to avoid. I would never think of telling a person how to write, because I don't know you. And by you, I mean all of you. A lot of people watch this who are writers or want to be writers or beginning writers. And it's just you be you. Write what you want to write, and to hell with anybody else. You don't owe anybody anything when you're writing. This is the content of your mind, and you're putting it down. And you're learning. Writing is learning how to take these ideas and turn them into something that other people might enjoy. And that's what writing is. And I don't care what you're writing. I mean, if Albert Einstein couldn't write, we wouldn't even know his name now, because Albert Einstein had all these crazy ideas, but now he had to impart them to others. And it turned out Einstein was a hell of a writer, because he was able to impart these revolutionary ideas about the very nature of the universe. And he was able to impart them so that basically a popular audience could at least tentatively grasp what he was talking about and understand the significance of what he was talking about. So it's, writing is more than having crazy ideas, but it begins with crazy ideas. And the craft of it is honing that part of it to change those crazy ideas into something understandable and entertaining and engaging for an audience. And that's your job. Not, writing to some great mythic zeitgeist, the kind of thing that Joseph Campbell proposes. Jason Nessman. My grandfather on my dad's side was 3rd Division World War II, from North Africa all the way to Austria. He hated General Patton. My grandpa said Patton pulled up in a Jeep and told him to clear a road. My grandpa said, F you. He said no one turned him in. It must have been late in the war. He said the infantry would clear an area and Patton would come in with his tanks and try to take credit. I also saw interviews with 1st Infantry Division guys that said the same thing. Patton was overrated. Sorry, he was right about the Russians, though. Yeah, I don't know if Patton was overrated, but I never, ever discount the word or the stories of the vets who were on the ground at the time. And yeah, I know a lot of guys didn't like Patton because he spent guys. You know, World War II was a tough grind. And it's not like World War One, but it was still bad. I mean, the the nature of warfare, house to house fighting, artillery barrages, the timetable, the pressure that was on these troops to basically bring down the Nazi regime as quickly as possible before winter set in, it was immense. And consequently, they spent guys. I mean, think about the Normandy landing. You're dropping guys off on a heavily fortified beach. And at some points, you wanted them to climb cliffs under, with grappling hooks and climbing lines under intense enemy fire. I mean, that's insane. We wouldn't do something like that today. We would find a way around a mission like that. We would find a different way to do it. Back then, they simply didn't have the option for that. And they were learning as they went along. Lessons learned. That's the nature of warfare. And Patton spent a lot of guys, but I would argue, on the other hand, that the speed that he moved at, the speed that the Third Army moved at, probably saved a lot of guys. Because the longer the war went on, the more soldiers were going to die. So you have to measure one against the other. I don't know how these guys did it, how these field commanders did it, where they're sending men out knowing that they were going to die. But it was true across the spectrum in World War II. I mean, if you were an infantryman in France or Italy, you had a pretty good chance of surviving. A better chance than if you were in a submarine or a B-17 bomber, where the attrition rate was like 25%. I mean, 1/4 of the guys who were in subs and long-range bombers died in World War II. 1/4. If in Napoleonic times, that was unacceptable level of casualties. Back in the days when guys fired muskets at each other, once your side lost 10%, reached 10% casualties, you left the field. We were sending guys up to die. We were sending them to sea to die. We were sending them into the air to die. We were sending them out in the field to die. And it takes a certain kind of individual to do that. So I'm not going to say Patton was overrated, because he certainly wasn't overrated by the Germans. That he was the general they most feared. But I'm going to say, yeah, if that's what your granddad said, then that's what your granddad said. If he thinks that Patton was some kind of an a-hole, well, he probably was. And just to show you that, the kind of things that vets will tell you that nobody else will. I talked to a lot of World War II vets. Talked to a lot of any kind of vets. I mean, if you're fresh back from wherever, I'll start pestering you with questions. And I think vets appreciate people's curiosity even more than the thank you for your service thing. It's like, what did you do over there? What was it like? What branch were you in? What was your, specialty? All this. Tell me about it. And I'm not looking for war stories. I'm not looking for gore and glory and all the rest, but just, how did you feel about it? What were the day-to-day experiences? Do you have any funny anecdotes about, mealtime or whatever? And one terrific story I heard was from a high school friend of mine. His dad was in the Army, and he got all the way to Germany. He got all the way to the Elbe River, and he was amongst the first American troops to meet Russian troops at the famous meeting at the Elbe River. And of course, if you've seen film footage, it's all happy Ruskies and GIs, shaking hands and hugging each other and big smiles all around for the cameras. And my friend's dad said it was anything but that. He says that was strictly for the cameras. And he says, because we had to spend a few days in town with the Russians. Basically, we were occupying this town on the Elbe River with the Russian army, with the Soviet army. And he says that all of the Soviet soldiers had been taught 2 words in English to say whenever they met an American. And the words were, America, shit. That's what they were told to say. He goes, there was no camaraderie. There was no brotherhood once the cameras were gone. The Russians were basically told to just treat Americans with complete disdain. Probably because Stalin feared that if they actually got to talk to an American, they might realize what a crappy deal they had in the USSR. Another really terrific story behind the scenes of a famous event that I heard was I was hiking on the Appalachian Trail years ago. And, when you're hiking on the trail, you meet people that you're never going to meet. You've never met before. You're never going to meet them again. And you'll end up camping with them, sharing a meal. And I remember I was at a shelter. It was cold, way above a town called Palmerton, Pennsylvania, and shared the campfire and a couple of cups of coffee with 2 guys. And it was a father and it was a guy and his son-in-law. They were hiking together. And the dad was, World War II age. And we got to talking about this, your life, who are you, where you're from, blah, blah, blah. And he told this great story about how it was the very end of World War II. He was in the Navy. They were in Tokyo Harbor. All of the American fleet was parked in Tokyo Harbor. And him and his pals got really drunk. And they went ashore and they found some crates of oranges that Japanese farmers were selling. And they bought these oranges and they went boat to boat around Tokyo Harbor selling these oranges. Now they're drunk as lords at this point. So they've got a launch and they're zipping around the harbor trying to sell oranges to guys on, aircraft carriers and destroyers and such like that. And he says, we pull up to this sort of impromptu dock, this wooden dock that's set alongside this battleship. And he says, we've never seen anything like it before. The battleship is decorated with all this red, white, and blue bunting and American flags hanging everywhere. He says, it looked like a float in a parade. And he says, so we go up to this dock and we, we're drunk. So we bang into the end of the dock. He says, we nearly knocked this thing off the boat. And the chief petty officer leans over the railing and says, what the hell are you guys doing? And they're like, hey, you want to buy some oranges? And the guy says, get out of here, get away from this boat. And they're like, what's he so mad about, right? So they get away from the boat, luckily, with nobody taking names. And then find out later that the boat they slammed into was the USS Missouri. And, and this was like 30 minutes before the Japanese showed up to surrender. So there you go, a little story you're never going to hear anywhere else. You're only going to hear that story around a campfire. It's not going to be one in the history books about some drunken sailors who almost interrupted one of the great historical events of the 20th century because they wanted to sell some citrus. Clayton Merwin, what's your view on AI art? Well, it kind of scares me, to tell you the truth. Let me skip ahead to this other image. Because it's getting better. When I first saw AI art, like all of us, it was like a joke. It's like, what is this? It looks like crap. It doesn't look like anything I'd want to ever look at. And this image is kind of typical. I mean, what is this? What's going on here? What did they say they wanted in this picture? And this is what they ended up with. And I guess that's the art of AI, is determining, what you want in the picture and try to fine tune it. And eventually they'll be able to do that. Eventually they'll be able to go through second and third and fourth, turns to, filter and finesse and edit these images. But for now, it's just, you put in a couple of elements and, bingo, bango, who knows what's going to come out the other end. Eventually you'll be able to have more control over these things. And to a certain extent, it's already happening. Someone recently showed me AI-generated comic book pages, full color. And it was kind of frightening because it's like, I might actually read this comic. The art isn't great, but if the story was good, it's certainly good enough for me to read. And then I've seen some people do some other stuff that it's like, wow, this comic book art is actually good. These pages are actually good. The style's consistent. The panel composition and everything else are engaging. This is dangerous because ultimately what's going on here is these AI programs steal artwork. They steal from here, they steal from there. That's why you'll see, and a lot of times in artificial intelligence generated images, characters will have too many fingers or too many legs because the AI program's stupid. It's artificial intelligence, but it isn't intelligence. It's artificial intelligence. It's like artificial sugar. It's not sugar. It's artificial intelligence is as stupid as any other aspect of computerization. It only knows what you inform it of. And, if it's borrowing from photographs or whatever, it's like, that's bad enough. But when it's stealing from an actual artist, here we picture the late, sadly departed late Kim Jong-gi, who apparently his estate is involved in a lawsuit with AI producers because they're ripping stuff off from his rich library of images. If you're not familiar with Kim Jong-gi, I suggest you look him up. He would put out sketchbooks annually, and any one of them is worth getting. This guy was absolutely an incredible draftsman, amazing, unstoppable, bottomless well of imagination, and a rich target for artificial intelligence to steal from, and that's the problem. I know artists who have looked at AI and say, well, that's one of my eyes, or that's, that I drew that hair. And that's sad. But the scary thing is it's cheap. So you're going to see AI produce comic books, and it's going to replace people in a way that I never anticipated computers ever replacing anybody. So you're going to be seeing, a lot more of this, like it or not. And it's all going to rely on the talent of the person programming it, which is, it's not good. AI already plays a part in writing stories that you see. And we're going to be seeing more of that as well. And it's kind of the death of a culture. Really, it's the greatest threat, even more than wokeism, because wokeism will pass. This won't. This is with us forever. When you've got wannabes who could never produce a comic book on their own because they lack the talent, craft, discipline, or patience, that will be able to basically, almost literally, crap a comic book out overnight. It's going to be stiff competitions strictly because they're not going to have to sell a lot of them to make their money back because they didn't put a lot of money into it in the first place. These programs are already available to the public. They'll continue to be more available. And of course, you'll probably have professional level, more skilled ones with more bells and whistles that you can buy and use. And it's dangerous. And the comic book publishers are already looking at this, if not invested in it fully. Charles Santino, did you ever write a Conan story with no magic or sorcery, a straight adventure story? Yeah, I wrote a bunch of them in my time. I always liked the idea of Conan and I think Howard did this as well, as a way of writing historical fiction without having to do a lot of research or be restricted by the actual historical facts. If you just wanted to write toy soldier fantasy war story or adventure story or whatever. And I wrote lots of them. when I first got on Conan, I was advised by Larry Hama to avoid the Monster of the Month, Wizard of the Week kind of story, which Conan had kind of fallen into a formula for a while, where each issue barely had a story. It was just Conan meeting a different monster or meeting a different wizard and having to defeat them. And yeah, I was cool with that because I wanted to tell war stories, and straight up adventure stories. And I did a lot of them. I'd say probably, 30 to 40% of my Conan output had no supernatural elements, whatsoever. So, yeah, check it out. JD Santibeniz. Oh, I'm killing your last name. An elevator pitch for Shadow Green Hornet story. That's pretty easy. You start out with the Shadow believing that Green Hornet is a criminal, as he masquerades to be, and then eventually coming to the realization that no, he's not. He's actually a good guy pretending to be a gangster. And then in the end, they would lie to take down whatever big bad mobster they first set out to oppose. And I imagine the Hornet being a bit horrified by the Shadow's tactics. No Hornet sting for the Shadow, just a 45 round through the brain will do. So anyway, while I got you, Rambo First Kill still available in demand on Indiegogo. It's a graphic novel about John Rambo's, it's basically his year one, his origin story. It's his first tour in Vietnam. We see him go from a high school student in Arizona to being ending up in the U.S. Army in a desperate battle around a besieged fire base in the Ia Drang Valley. And it's a straight up war story and some incredible talent on it. The aforementioned Butch Guice, Aaron Affleck, Matt Barr, and many others. And it's due to be released in April. It's coming up on us soon. And it's as I said, it's in demand. You can pick it up now, and it's going to be more expensive later if you don't get it now. So check it out. I'll have a link down there in the comments. If you want to contact me with questions, suggestions, pictures of your doggies and kitties, contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. brunobookstore@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And